this computer. Okay, so hi everybody again. We are be recording this session. I'm Brenda Posner from Langdon Title. I just want to let you know, if you want to share it with anyone, it's fine to share it, but no one that listens to this recording will get credit. It's only people that are actually on the class today. So as I said, Langdon Title is fully operational. We're working fully remotely. If you have any questions on your deals, please feel free to reach out to me at bposner@langdontitle.com, or you can reply back to any of the invitations or any of the certificates. All those emails come back to me. So I'm happy to answer any questions and try to help you on your deals. As I said again, I'm a title closer. I've been doing title closings for over 20 plus years. So I'm so familiar with the whole process, and I've done almost every type of closing. So, you know, it would be very helpful to have me on your team. And I would love to be able to work with you guys, whether it's on your current deals that you're having problems with or on your future deals. Please consider us a resource. We're here to help you. We do these classes so you get to know us and you get to know the fabulous attorneys that we work with. So on that note, I'm going to give you over to Fernando and Cal.
Thank you, Brenda. My name is Fernando Koatz. I'll be doing this continuing education class on zoning rules, regulations, and so forth with Kal Qubain, my esteemed partner. Before we begin, just by way of introduction, Cal and I have been practicing together for many years. I do mainly real estate, transactional and residential, purchases and sales, and leasing, as well as financing and setting up structures to make the investments in real estate. In that regard, Cal and I have had a lot of experience with all kinds of real estate transactions here in New York City, up north to as far as the Catskills, and out east as far as the Hamptons. And the class we'll be doing today, as I said, is zoning, and zoning is a tricky subject, complicated one. And if you have questions after each slide, we'll try to reply to them. This should be about 2 hours, but I'm not sure. And we look forward to talking about this subject, and hopefully you'll find it instructive and come away with something that can help you in the future with your deals. In any case, I want to thank Brenda, brilliant Brenda. We've worked with her before and with her title insurance company. She's excellent, and I'm not acting as a shill now. She knows what she's talking about. She really is very, very knowledgeable, which is important because in all the things we talk about, Cal and I, with respect to real estate, we're always talking about having a good team together. That team includes, in other contexts, title insurance, CPA, financial, real estate, brokers like you who are very, very important to get the deal done and navigate choppy waters that sometimes will happen without even realizing. So, starting with terms. Zoning, such as it is something that was developed in 1916. That was the first zoning resolution in the country. It came here in New York City, and is to understand, before we get into the history and the different applications and the districts and how it works, and a little bit about zoning lot mergers and so forth. Air rights is even included a little in this class. We should try to be clear what these terms are. And zoning, for example, you'll see on this slide, includes bulk regulations, and these describe the size, including the height and the floor area of buildings or other structures, and their relationship to each other and to an open area. And that's important to understand, because a lot of the zoning, whether it's commercial, residential, manufacturing, or special districts, will take into account bulk regulations, which will also come into play whether there are bonuses that are allowed, for example, with the public open space or affordable housing, which is another thing the city tries to promote over time. Is important to realize that's one of the terms that's used quite often and liberally, if you will. Another term which is very important is Department of City Planning, which is the New York City agency that administers land use policy. In other words, with respect to the New York City Zoning Resolution, the first one being in 1916, the next important one was in 1961, which really addressed air rights, which is another class which we've done with brilliant Brenda.
I'm sorry, Fernando, let me just interrupt you. Some people are saying that your microphone is echoing. I can hear you very well. I don't think there's a problem. Brenda is also nodding that she can hear you. If somebody cannot hear you, maybe they should mute their mics or get the speaker's volume. Also, other people are asking for the PowerPoint presentation, and I just replied in the chat that that will be sent after the presentation to everybody who participated. That's all. I'm sorry, Fernando. Go ahead.
No, it's quite all right, Cal. By the way, if you also want to send an email directly, please feel free. That's the way to obtain the zoning, the PowerPoint, which we have here. In any case, thank you very much, Cal. And I'm sorry if my voice has been echoing. I don't know what that's about. I am not technologically proficient, which is not that important in any case. The other term I have here, which we listed, is development in the zoning resolution. This includes construction, new building structures, relocating structures, or creating new open use, such as a public plaza. Development rights are included in development, which really means air rights, which again was another class we had just a couple of weeks ago. And air rights really is the air that's above building that is not being used and can be transferred to another adjacent lot through a zoning lot merger, or if one asks for a variance in zoning, then they can maybe increase the height of the building. The other term, which is very important to know, is floor area ratio. But before you get to floor area ratio, you have to understand what floor area is, which is really the sum of the gross area of the floors of buildings that's measurable from the exterior faces of walls or from the center lines of the wall separating two buildings. Once you understand what the floor area is, then you come to the floor area ratio, which is the total floor area on a zoning lot divided by the zoning lot area. To give a very simple example, if you have a building with 20,000 square feet of floor area in a zoning lot that has 10,000 square feet, that would be an FAR, the initials for floor area ratio, of 2.0. Now, the important thing to understand is that floor area ratio varies. It varies on the location, whether the zoning lot or the structure, whatever, faces a wide or narrow street. It varies on the use, whether it's commercial or residential manufacturing. And it varies with respect to the public benefits, whether it's a space that's put there as a plaza or setback or whatever, or with respect to housing, affordable housing. This is a very tricky subject. As I said, it has a lot of nuances and a lot of details, and I hope I can be as understandable or make it understandable to you. And this is just one of the many things that Cal and I will be talking about. Another term that's important is to know is height factor, which is really just the total floor area of the building divided by lot coverage. It's important with respect to multi-residential buildings. Lot coverage, which is the percentage of a lot structure that covers the lot itself, excluding any obstructions. The New York City Zoning Resolution, which I just mentioned above, which is really the official law containing all of New York City's zoning requirements. More about that later on. And the setback, which I just mentioned briefly, which is the distance between the building and the street, either at the grade level or above. I don't know if that's understandable, but I move on because there are more terms that are just as important. Are there any questions here that need to be answered, Cal? I haven't seen any.
Yeah, there's a few questions, but I think they will be answered as we go. There's a question saying, can you send us the list of codes used for what the property zoning is?
Well, yeah, that's better. They just have to go to New York City Department of Buildings website. There, they can have all the codes.
Right, and there's extensive list on the Department of Buildings with all that.
All right, zoning terms continued. What is important here that we wanted to really define is the word use. Use is probably one of the most important terms, along with bulk, in the world of zoning, and it really refers to any activity or purpose associated with a structure or the land, and that land, whether it's for what kind of occupation, business, or operation. There are 18 different groups of uses. Those are described in Appendix A of the Zoning Resolution, which again is available through the New York City Planning Department through its website. Now, these use groups are structures with, have to do with structures with similar associated activities or purposes. And there are 7 general categories of these groups: residential, uses 1 and 2, community facility, which would be uses 3 and 4. Retail and service, uses 5 through 9. Regional commercial centers and amusements, or parks, amusement parks, which is uses 10 through 12. Waterfront and recreation, which are uses 13 to 15. And heavy automotive, which is use 16. Finally, there's industrial, which is uses 17 through 18. And with respect to zoning, it's important to know there are basically 3 zoning districts I've mentioned before. Commercial, what does commercial include? Includes retailers, service providers, offices, residential / community facility uses are permitted, but not manufacturing. The next group is manufacturing, which has 3 levels. There are 3 levels of manufacturing districts. They're based on the intensity of the industrial use. Performance warehouses, for example, maritime is considered industrial. They're subject to specific performance standards regarding maximum allowed light, noise, odor, smoke, and vibration levels, the things you'd expect, for example, with respect to a factory. And there's some commercial uses permitted manufacturing, but not residential. Then there's a residential district, which is really 75% of New York City's land area, as incredible it may seem. And these include various home types, single-family homes, more prevalent in the outer boroughs, mixed-use apartment buildings, which are prevalent throughout the 5 boroughs, and manufacturing is not usually allowed. Commercial uses are permitted if the residential district has a commercial overlay, and we'll get back into that later on, talking about the different districts, including what are called non-contextual and contextual districts. Now, the important thing just to add here is there's also definition in the zoning handbook that the New York City publishes with respect to non-conforming use, and that's a use, as it says, that's not conforming to the regulations and uses in the zoning resolution. That's very important to understand because so many people try to put something forward. They need the approval and authorization of different agencies that are involved, and there are a lot of agencies involved in this with respect to zoning. And they're going to have to prove that if they can get a variance for that non-conforming use. So use itself is very important, as we try to say in this slide, but it's important to understand the other concept, which is non-conforming uses, which is really also the basis of a lot of what goes on with respect to appeals and applications and so forth, with respect to Department of Buildings, the Bureau of Standard and Appeals, and so on. Are there any questions or comments here?
No, Fernando.
Thank you. Okay, that's it basically. And this is a very summarized description of what the zoning terms that apply to everything we'll be talking about going forward. Now, it's important to understand, I believe, I talked about this with Cal, a little about the history of zoning and why it's such a big deal here in New York. As I said, it started here in New York, and it's something that's all over the country now. And it's something that really developed, if you know something about the history, with the Equitable Building that was put up in 1912 in downtown, which led to the first zoning resolution in 1916. The reason is because that Equitable Building was so tall, so measurably taller than all the surrounding buildings, created so many shadows and deprived sunlight of people that there was an uproar that was ensued in New York City. They said, we have to control somehow. We have to determine where you can put a building, how you can do it. And because of that, they developed the Zoning Resolution 1916, which eventually led to that development you see in Wall Street downtown and the central business district of Midtown, and used in other contexts down the road or later on in history, Hudson Yards, the Barclays Center, 125th Street in Harlem, Fordham Road in the Bronx, Flushing in Queens, and so on. The point of the zoning resolution, above all, is to ensure that air and light could reach as much as possible the city streets, even in the shadow of these incredible skyscrapers like the Equitable Building put up or constructed in 1912. Urban planners, property owners, and residents in all 5 boroughs wanted some kind of regulation, which would include regulations on height, the setback requirements, and so forth. And they wanted to ban certain projects in established residential areas through exclusionary zoning rules. That's the whole point of this law. The zoning resolution led to the widespread embrace of low-rise buildings and plazas, and particularly in residential neighborhoods, subject to the exclusionary zoning rules. And here, structure heights had to be proportionate to street widths, and the towers could not could not occupy entire lots. The whole point was not to have unrestricted, unplanned building in the city, which at that point remains the largest city in the United States. The main agency that is in charge of this is the New York City Department of Buildings, the DOB, a place, if I may interject some personal comment here, I never want to set foot in because it's a maze of, and a warren of different offices, and it's a beehive of activity, and it's thorny at best to get through there. People who deal with the DOB are generally architects, general contractors, and expediters. And the whole point of the DOB and these people that Cal and I have used in the past, or our clients have used, is to issue permits, review applications, interpret provisions of the zoning resolution, orders, and correct any zoning violations, and maintain public records. For a time, they issued what were called technical policy and procedure notices that explained the zoning resolution. That was one method. And to understand also that the DOB is not the only agency that is involved with zoning. There's the Board of Standards and Appeals, the Department of City Planning, community boards are involved as well, especially when the variances are applied for by developers. Borough president can be involved. Landmark Preservation Committee can also be involved with respect to certain landmark buildings and any zoning or development that occurs next to them or try to do on top of them or whatever. The city council, New York City Council gets involved, and the mayor. And eventually, if things don't go well and there's no agreement and there's an uproar, it ends up in the courts. So a lot of different actors are involved in here. It's a lot of moving parts. And that's another reason why it's such a tricky and complicated area of law, which is also, and I don't want to sound dorky here, and I've told this to Cal, it's endlessly interesting. It's not boring. I mean, it's dry in a sense of going through numbers and so forth and trying to come up with the FAR and blah, blah, blah. But it's also, there are a lot of things that go on there that are very fascinating. They really are, especially in a great city like New York.
And somebody, Fernando, is asking whether we can recommend Kings County Expediter. I think we can if you send us an email separately. We have resources with architects, and I'm sure they can provide some recommendations.
Yes, please send an email to remind us. I'll be very grateful.
Our contact information, Brenda thankfully put it in the chat. So if you scroll up, you'll find mine and Fernando's contact information.
Well, here's a question that's interesting. Any reason why the city allowed the buildings to be built so incredibly high in Midtown without considering shadows now hurting the landscape in Central Park? It's a very good question. I don't know the people who are involved with the development, but I think part of the reason they could do this is because it was set back. Those buildings, I believe, are on, you're talking about on 57th Street, and being at least 2 blocks from 59th Street, which of course would be extra distance from the park, which 59th borders it, or Central Park South, probably permitted them to do that. But I'm pretty sure also what they did, correct me if I'm wrong, Cal, there were a lot of zoning lot mergers there to permit that kind of thing to go through, accumulating air rights on that entire street or area, because zoning lot mergers are as of right with respect to adjoining lots that have at least 10 linear feet in common. That's, again, we discussed that in the air rights class a couple weeks ago. But if you want to transfer and bundle, if you will, air rights from different lots that are not adjacent to each other, you need permission. So someone must have gone in there, asked for the variances and so forth, and put it up and made the case that whatever shadows they would throw, you can tell they're very narrow buildings, relatively speaking, they're not bulky, and they may have approved it for that reason.
I think, like Fernando said, that many variances might have gone through this, and there are exclusionary rules. So it's very hard to speak in the abstract without specifying which building and looking into the history of it. But I agree with you. There are many that are basically raise questions as they're not being done in conformity with the rules we're talking about. There was another question I was wondering about 200 Amsterdam. Have they not obtained correct permits? Why is it controversial? Thanks.
Is that, I'm not, is that the one where the court ruled that they were too high and they have to bring down the floors? I don't remember.
I'm not sure. It might be it, yes.
Well, that the courts, and that's what I was saying before. Ultimately, if there's a dispute, the courts get involved, and I'm sure they saw it as doing something that wasn't by the book, so to speak, or maybe an environmental impact statement had been done. It's easy to move these things along in a certain degree and get the support, especially of political support. The problem is going to be that if people do realize what's going on, then the courts will get involved. But that case is not settled, because as sure as the sun shines on most days in New York, there will be an appeal. I'm sure they're planning some kind of appeal of that decision. And I think that's the one you're talking about. I'm not sure if someone can clarify with respect to that question. There's another question here from another attendee about how do other major international cities handle zoning issues? London, Paris, or was New York? Yeah. Okay. Zoning itself refers to districts that permit commercial, manufacturing, and so forth. So yes, it was the first, was a leader in this. Paris, for example, if I'm correct, I don't remember, will not allow anything higher than the Eiffel Tower within Paris proper. Now they have something called La Défense, which are on the outskirts, and they have these tall buildings, which are not typical of most of Paris. I believe that's what they did. That's not so much zoning as having a height limit like Washington, D.C. has, that nothing can be higher than the Washington Monument. That's a regulation. It's related to zoning, but not the exact same thing. London, I'm not sure what they've done there. I know, I should know, but I'm not familiar because I haven't done any real estate development in London. I'm sorry.
Just to go back to the 200 Amsterdam, Fernando, there was a Supreme Court a decision in February that basically affected 20 stories of that building, and that's being under appeal right now, or undergoing appeal right now. And the technique in assembling the zoning basically is raising concern that this could be used in other zoning lots in the same way across the city, and that's why it became somewhat controversial.
Yeah, well, it's very controversial because they're ordering the building and the developers to tear down some of the floors that they put up there. So that is the same building. Thank you for reminding me. It's a crazy situation. Well, our firm is involved with something not similar, but they're trying to put up in Brooklyn, one of their neighborhoods, put up some buildings that will affect light and shadow. And one of the biggest things that they said there, that's gone to the courts already, the courts haven't decided anything. It was partly nothing could be done now because of the lockdown and throughout March, April, and May, although the courts are starting to open again. Part of the thing was that there was never an environmental impact statement that was done or prepared with respect to the proposal that these people were putting together for Brooklyn that was approved and had political support. So a lot of things depends, as I said, on the political support, how they did it. And I'm not sure what the grounds were. I didn't read the case. I didn't read the decision. So it likely could be some application procedure was not followed by that developer. And if that's not true, they're paying the price. Okay, the thing we're talking about here, continuing history, is the New York City Zoning Resolution. The first was in 1916. As I said before, 1961 was the next big one that codified the transfer of development rights, and in which zoning lot mergers were allowed as of right. They'd occurred before, but here now was codified. And the resolution had an incentive, the 1961 one, and its amendments that really governs everything now. Incentive zoning program to encourage developers to construct open public spaces and to clear up sidewalk congestion. This 61 resolution, which regulates and establishes limits on land use and building size, shape, height, and setbacks, created 3 distinct zones. That's when they first came into being: commercial, manufacturing, residential, and included language to allow designers and developers to erect taller office buildings with wide open floor plans. The 61 resolution also addressed for the first time, formally anyway, the issue of parking. And that, as we know in Manhattan, is a big issue, a big problem. And it included things with respect to providing garages or spaces and the like. And it's the first time that it was part of the law and to be considered for any part of any zoning with respect to any variances and so forth. There was a 77 zoning resolution, which really was an amendment that disassociated development rights with land ownership, and single ownership was no longer required to merge a lot. So in other words, the air rights that are sold above a building do not always remain just with the owner of that building. They can be transferred without a problem to the next door lot owner. And in special cases and different and more complicated cases, when they bundle air rights, an entire block area to permit one building to be taller than the rest, if there's approval by the agencies. Zoning lot mergers or transfers of development rights are transferred as of right, as I've said, by the New York City Zoning Resolution provision 12-10, which is title definition. And the donor receiver properties need to have 10 feet of contiguous property line, which I said before. And it states in the slide exactly how it's carried out or how they define it. Are there any questions here?
No.
All right, good. Moving right along. Sorry. Zoning resolution continued. The zoning resolution of New York City contains 14 articles and 10 appendices, an incredibly complex document, which is why there are so many people involved: lawyers, expediters, architects, general contractors, bureaucrats. It's nothing easy to decipher, and it's difficult to address. And of course, it can be done, but it's not done smoothly. So in addition to the 14 articles and the 10 appendices, there are 126 zoning maps. Now, these changes to the zoning map include district designations and boundaries subject to the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure, or affectionately known as ULURP by its initials. ULURP we'll talk about just a little while later, is another agency that's involved when there's a variance with respect or request for variance in the zoning lots to put up some kind of structure which is non-conforming. The resolution, as I said, consisting of the articles, appendices, and the zoning maps, established the zoning districts for the City of New York and the regulations governing its use and development. Articles 1 through 7 contain the use, which we talked about before as a defined term, bulk, another defined term, parking, and other applicable regulations for each zoning district. And the three major articles are Article 2, with respect to regulations of residential districts, Article 3, with respect to commercial districts, and Article 4 for manufacturing districts. And Articles 8 through 14 talk about the purpose and the regulations of special purpose districts, for example, like Hudson Yards, 125th Street in Harlem, and the like. That's basically what the zoning resolution does, which controls zoning in New York City. Are there any other questions here? Looks like there isn't.
No, it's either people are not paying attention to you, Fernando, or you're explaining it very well.
Is the glass half empty or half full? I don't know.
That's the question.
See, the thing is, I've said this before in other classes I've done, that this is like being on the radio. Now, I'm not a radio personality, I have my own radio program, but you're talking and it's the empire of air, so to speak, and you don't know who's out there listening. I'm not saying that as a plea of feeling sorry for myself, but I have no idea. I wish to know anyway, because I will more than happy correct, revise, or re-explain if you want me to. This is your chance.
Well, so we're getting comments here saying, you know, it's very complicated. However, you're explaining it very well, and it's a good class. So, and people are there, so that's a good sign.
Thank you very much. What about new zoning regulation in New York? That's something. Please send Cal or me an email, and that's happening a lot. Okay, good. I'm not trying to get any praise or whatever. It's not about that or feeling insecure, but I'm glad that there people are paying attention. In any case, they have a good question here. Why is Harlem a special purpose district? Because of 125th Street. But when that happens, by the way, and that the special purpose district has been created, as political pressure brought to bear on these agencies. And they say, look, we want to preserve the character and create more economic development in Harlem. So that's one of the reasons created. I remember all the arguments that were done for that. Frankly, it was done many years ago, but that's one of the things that creates a special purpose district, political pressure. There's another comment here. I'm not sure what it is. 3 houses next to each other. Builder bought 3 houses and built 7-story building. I need more facts with that, but that seems that did a zoning lot merger. I'd have to see what the contract said and what the applications were made to the Department of Buildings. Another one has a good question here. Are foreigners allowed to buy air rights? Is there a limit? Anyone can buy air rights. A foreigner can own land. It's the same thing. It's air rights, although it's not land, it's real property. And what's important here, there are also 1031 exchanges applied to air rights, just like they do to real estate, or in other words, houses or commercial residential property. So yes, foreigners can do it. This country does not have any ban on any foreigners, anything like that. The only time foreigners, and I'm going a little far afield here, have a problem if they're getting some of this military, industrial, that kind of thing, which can affect the security of the country, supposedly. So that there are no restrictions. Just like people ask me a lot, because Cal and I have a lot of foreign clients. It turns out that way. I'm from Latin America originally. Cal's from the Middle East. So we have a lot of clients, and from abroad who want to invest in real estate or do other kinds of businesses. It's no problem bringing funds in here as well. Once they go through the bank's due diligence and know your customer, KYC, and anti-money laundering. No limit. Another question here is, does that mean restrictions in Harlem? I don't know specifically what they are. If you send me an email, I can provide that for you. Another here, please describe a special purpose district and how many in New York. I believe in reply to that question, I know at least 4. I'd have to look into that. And a special purpose district, that's something where they wanted to provide and develop through zoning a district, which usually is a combination of commerce, some residential, and the like, in order to promote that and to make it as something that would be good for the city for economic development. It really has to do with economic development more than anything else. I hope that's clear. All right, next slide.
I'm not sure, Fernando, if you were addressing the issue about what's going on with zoning in the garment district. I'm sorry if I missed it.
No, I didn't see that one.
Okay, that was in the chat, not in the question and answer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I believe what's going on in the garment district is that the city council approved some zoning changes in the district to allow more space for use by a variety of businesses while leaving what's left for the apparel industry. I don't know if that's what the question is referring to, but that's basically in a nutshell what's going on.
Okay, thank you, Cal. Thank you for addressing that question. Next slide here is zoning map, New York City. The zoning map, what is that? It describes the manufacturing, commercial, and residential districts for the most part. These zoning maps show the boundaries of these districts, and it's updated after the City Planning Commission and the City Council have approved zoning changes. There are a set of 126 maps. They're part of the zoning resolution, as I said before, and it's displayed or shown in 35 sections. Each section is identified with a number, obviously, from 1 to 35, and they're further divided into 4 quarters, each identified by a letter A, B, C, or D. So you have map 8D or 33C, for example, and each map covers approximately an area of 8,000 feet north-south by 12,500 feet east-west. Please do not ask me to convert that into meters, because I can't do that offhand. For those of you who think in meters. By the way, and I'm digressing. I think it's 1 square meter equals about 9 square feet, I believe, more or less. Is that right, Cal?
Yes, almost.
Thank you. I should know that, but since I've lived most of my life here in the States, in New York, I forget about meters and kilometers and all that. Okay, before I get to New York City Oasis Map, any questions? No.
Let me just check the Q&A.
Oh, who creates the parties engaged in creating? That's a good question from one of the attendees. I believe, as I said before, that's a political issue, and it becomes involved with the city council and other people, politicians, the borough president of the county where the district is supposed to be located, and local leaders in the state assembly or representatives to New York State Assembly and legislature who are from that district. They all put it together and start putting a plan. It takes a long time. It's not an easy thing. But eventually, if there's enough political pressure and people putting it together and acting upon it, that it can be accomplished. So Oasis, New York City. It's another map that's very important for developers and people who are interested in real estate and land use, especially people who are not professionals or nonprofit groups that are concerned about what's going on in their neighborhood. It stands for Open Accessible Space Information System. This thing began really through the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Forest Service. They wanted a map with respect to open space resources in, among other places, in New York City. It's a way to visualize the concentration or absence of parks, community gardens, wetlands, and other infrastructure that's deemed green in every city neighborhood and on a citywide scale. In other words, the 5 boroughs of New York City. In 2000, the Forest Service got together about 40 greening groups, educators, individuals, businesses, nonprofits, and public agencies to guide for this new initiative, the Oasis, the initials are, and the committee selected a nonprofit mapping project to develop a series of interactive maps. And you can find these on, oh, I only put 2 W's, I'm sorry, www.oasisnyc.net, and it shows a list of participating organizations that have grown. It's more than 60 groups now with respect to Oasis. Now, the important thing here is, what is the purpose of this New York City Oasis map? It fills a niche, and that niche is, since there's not a public agency project or a for-profit, it's its own entity, and it provides an access parcel by parcel data, mapped land use for the 5 boroughs of New York. And unlike the for-profit real estate mapping sites, Oasis provides free access to this data. That's very important. And it provides, if you will, a level playing field for groups and individuals trying to make sense of one thing that happens all the time, which is the changes in development in this great city of ours. And the people mapping this site with property data and maps, they're urban planning students, community gardeners, real property professionals, urban design firms, and architects, city agency staff. This New York City people look into this who work for the city of New York. Teachers, neighborhood groups, very important, neighborhood groups and community boards, the media, and more so. And these are based on user surveys and web usage reports. They provide another picture. A property, for example, this is an example we have here in the slide, that shows that's home to a thriving community garden may be considered vacant by New York City real property tax assessors. In other words, they'll either have very little tax or none at all in an area called that has a community garden. And the city websites most likely will show that area. And you see these, for example, Lower East Side has quite a number of them, and the Bronx as well, where they're quote unquote empty areas, and it looks vacant. It really does to the city website that puts it together, or the maps in the city website. But for Oasis, it captures that and it shows both. And that's important because, again, with respect to that matter that our firm is involved with in Brooklyn, one of the things that they're trying to show with this putting together in this neighborhood of these different lots that are being merged. And the interesting in that case is that there are lots that are being merged that are not contiguous to each other, which is why there were a lot of required different approvals needed from different agencies to show that this is casting shadows, among other things, on gardens in that area, including community gardens, by having a higher building there than is supposed to be under that neighborhood's zoning regulations. So it's good to have because they can refer to this Oasis map rather than just the quote unquote typical zoning map that would have information that wouldn't be as complete or shine a light, as it were, on this kind of situation. Now, here we have a few more questions. Is it true they're going to sell Central Park in the 70s? I'm sorry, that's news to me. I never heard that. I'd like to see any article that refers to that. Have you heard of that at all, Cal?
No.
I find that almost, I don't want to be rude, but almost unbelievable. I'd like to know where that information comes from. Would I have to go, another comment here is, would I have to go to the DOB for lot lines of specific buildings, or does the managing agent of a building have a record? Both. Sometimes the managing agent may have it, but not always, but the DOB should have the information as well. And here's a comment to developer. Oh, it's a continuation of the Central Park question, to developers to make money for the city. I don't want to sound naive. I understand the question. I really doubt that, but it'd be interesting to find out if someone can send me more information. Any other
as to the special purpose districts, Fernando,
go ahead.
I'm not sure that we exhausted that question, but I'm not sure how many special purpose districts are there, and I think the agency that designated or designate a special purpose district is the City Planning Commission. I'm not sure if there are other parties involved, but the designation comes from the City Planning Commission. And there are few special purpose districts. Some are done, for example, to like a special coastal risk district. You have a commercial or enhanced commercial district, all for specific purposes. For example, the enhanced commercial district try to preserve the commercial aspect of the area with enhanced pedestrian involvement also. So there are many. I'm not sure how many are they, or I can't exactly tell you how many are there.
Yeah, thank you, Cal. I mean, I think we mentioned 3 or 4 here in this class through the slide presentation, but I'm not sure how many. It's a good point, but there are many here. Anyway, here's another chat comment. Our environment report soil test for specific lots public record. I think only that applies when there's an environmental impact statement that's been filed with respect to a development project. Otherwise, it's not generally going to be public record. We do a lot of commercial purchase and sales, and that becomes a very big issue about what I call phase 1 environmental reports. If there's no problem, no one goes beyond that, but there's a problem for contamination, God forbid radiation, whatever, oil spills, then it goes to a phase 2 to determine how bad it is and what remediation would be necessary. But those are private. Those are always private. No one's out there. They're not filed anywhere. There's no contract that's being recorded. That's a whole other issue. But for the purpose of the deal, New York City doesn't ask for any of that information. I think it's only becomes available when there's an environmental impact statement.
And also the owner of the site who's conducting the environmental study would keep that information private, especially that, you know, they have paid for it and they spend the money on it, and also, you know, they don't want to open themselves to some risks for others to come and look at the information or the report and say there's actually something wrong or there's contamination with it.
Absolutely, Cal. Good point. Someone mentions your Brooklyn Botanical Garden. Yes, bingo, you're right. That's what we're referring to with the Brooklyn issue. What else is here? Here's another comment. 3 houses, 60 feet wide each, total 100 feet wide, 100 feet deep. How do you calculate to building so many condos, living square feet? 7 condo building in Queens also need, all right. I understand what the attendee is saying here. Again, every district is different. There are all types of lots. There are things called split lots, which could be between 2 zoning districts. The zoning, and we'll go into this a little later in the slides. You have a designation, or there is a designation for a lot, but then there are letters from the alphabet that follow after R1, for example. So there's so many variations here. I don't know the specifics with respect to this. I understand the question, how could you put that up, or how can it be done? A lot goes on there, but even if it were not permitted, it was a non-conforming use, the point here is there are agencies to which a developer can go to, and if they have political support for it on top of it, they can get the variance. It's not impossible. And if that process, and I'm repeating myself, I'm sorry, I apologize, is not done correctly, for example, what happened with the one on Amsterdam Avenue, the courts will wrap their knuckles, and then we'll see what happens from there. So or the ongoing Brooklyn one that Cal and I have been working on. It's a lot, there are a lot of moving parts here, and it's hard to determine, a lot of nuances here. And I know it's a very complicated subject, and I apologize that it is that way. It's hard to bring it to an understanding, hopefully in the short time that we have, but it's hard to comment on that comment. And I understand it seems that there's frustration there that even these things could occur, but I can't know without knowing more details with respect to each of those projects. Okay, next one is zoning agencies. Now, Cal and I have been referring to this, and it's something that should be aware that part of the convoluted process we have in New York City, beautiful city that always has something interesting to say and do, good and bad. Nothing is ever that easy. So one of the things that we mentioned before was the Department of Buildings, but the other one, and we mentioned as well, is the Board of Standards of Appeals, BSA, which is part of the Department of City Planning Community Boards. This is the agency that talks about variances. So for example, a developer can file a request, and there'll be a zoning resolution for a variance under section 72-21. There's an application form, the BZ form. It's not, I'm not showing on the slides, but it's one of the many things that come into play with the respect to this application, the application process. There's the Department of Buildings denial sheet, which says, no, it can't be done. And that can be appealed as well. The zoning analysis form, so they must be submitted to the agency to determine whether something can be done. There's a resolution granting a variance, which I don't know in the specific case that been mentioned here before by other people, what went into that and how it turned out to be that way, and who was saying what for whatever reason. There's special permits that the Board of Standards and Appeals issue. All these things come into play with respect to the zoning and the zoning all over this great city. So for example, they have to look into section 73-44, which talks about reduction in parking spaces. That could be an issue. I don't know, depending where the structure is located or the premises. The modification zoning lot, that's under section 73-52. Section 73-63 talks about enlargement of non-residential buildings. Again, what comes into play here? There could be bulk, height. Those factors are weighed. They become mathematical formulas, and it depends whether that district is R1 dash whatever, BCD, or commercial, C1 through whatever. It's a lot of things that are addressed, and it's important to have someone knowledgeable address those issues. So whenever a lawyer is involved with this, and Cal and I have been involved with that, we don't do it alone. There's no way we can know the entire zoning resolution, everything that goes on there, even if we spent day and night on it. That's why we rely a lot, and that's that team concept, whether it's a title insurance or you, the real estate brokers. We work with the contractors, the expediters, and most importantly, the architects, because they are really, if they know what's going on, are a great source with respect to trying to understand and maneuver and work through the entire system to produce the documents necessary to get the approval when it's not as of right, or when one is seeking a variance concerning a development. I hope that's clear. Are there any questions regarding the slide or comments? Doesn't look like, oh, here's chat, there's one. This was emailed to me. I'm not sure if you answered the question. This is from Brenda to us, Cal. What is the expectation? Oh, you already of the garment district to become more residential. I have an interested investor wanting to purchase an Art Deco building to convert to residential building. I don't know if you want to answer that, Cal. It's up to you, or I can. I can't. You're on mute, Cal.
I'm sorry, Fernando. I was typing an answer. I didn't want to bother you with the keyboard. I really don't know what the expectations for the garment district, but I know what's going on and what we answered before. I really don't know what the outlook is going to be.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. And that'd be someone that would have to, I'm sorry, retain a lawyer and an architect and part of that team to find out what's going on. One of the things, and I don't want to sound corny here, that everyone talks about in real estate is location, location, location. I think the corollary to that is information, information, information. And unfortunately, sometimes information has a cost to it in order to develop it. Yes, they're public. All these websites are very good and we can get lots of the internet, but sometimes you need more than that and a certain expertise backing that. So that question is difficult to understand, to reply to. And your investor may need to hire consultants, lawyers, and so forth, I'm sorry to say. But it could be a smart decision, which could prevent waste of more money or lead to finding out about things that would be beneficial to pursuing that line.
I mean, I'm not sure if it's going to be more residential. I mean, the whole idea I think behind it is that it will be less restricted to garment businesses and non-fashion tenants. So it would, my guess, or my hunch is that it will be commercial, but not restricted to fashion and garment tenants. I'm not sure about the residential part.
Yeah. It's something that needs to be researched and devote some time to, but I understand the question, and hopefully the investor is willing to hire someone to help with that inquiry. With respect to zoning agencies, coming back to that, is talking about Department of City Planning, which I mentioned before. It's New York City's prime land use agency, and it's instrumental in designing New York City's physical and socioeconomic framework, by which I mean, how is this going to proceed with development in any given neighborhood in the 5 boroughs, if you want to emphasize or have more mixed use, residential, commercial, manufacturing, what kind of manufacturing? It can be a warehouse, as we said, a parking facility, sewage, a lot of things go on. Or what kind of commercial? Is it a more regional center or a center with respect, a regional sense to the borough or citywide and the like, or residential, more apartment buildings or more houses? All that stuff comes into play and is addressed by the Department of City Planning. Now, they have a review process when someone wants to make any changes. The chart shows a little about that. And the primary procedures, the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure, or ULURP, which sounds kind of strange. And they're the ones through that procedure that will allow special permits, rezoning, or any changes. It's done through a process of a land use review application. There's a City Planning Commission report. The City Planning Commission is responsible for the conduct of the planning regarding orderly growth and development of New York City, including adequate, appropriate resources for housing, business, industry, transportation, distribution, recreation, culture, comfort, convenience, health, and welfare of the population. In other words, all the things that we've been talking about up to now with respect to development in New York City. And this commission meets regularly with hearings with votes on applications concerning use development. Use, again, is defined as a defined term that we said at the beginning, an improvement of real property subject to these regulations that New York City issues. And it considers, this commission, the application while assessing the environmental impact where required by law. And that goes back to the environmental impact statement that's not always required. It's not always required, depends on the situation. And again, this is the point. A lot of these questions are good. A lot of these comments are very good, but it depends which zoning district you're talking about and which lot within that district and so forth. So this little chart explains a little about going from the community board, the borough president, to city planning commission, to the city council. It takes time and a lot of people who are involved. And that's, again, that team. If you need that, if they require the environmental impact statement, better get a good environmental engineer. We've dealt with that before in commercial settings, certainly. And it's a complex thing to understand. I've gotten environmental reports like phase 1 where I'm saying to myself, do I really understand the English language? I mean, it's convoluted, but it's a process that needs to be understood, both as a lawyer and that you need someone who's the environmental engineer. And this goes throughout with respect, as I keep on repeating, and I'm sorry, the architect, the general contractor, and the expediter, all people who help tremendously to get through this process, which is worthwhile if at the end the development is approved and along the lines that make it economically feasible. Any other comments here before I proceed to more zoning agencies? Here's one. There should be more public oversight. Well, yes, I agree with the attendee, and it's if the public oversight doesn't work through the agencies, then the courts are there, as we've mentioned. The question here is the city considering updating the requirement for BSA approval to install showers in gyms. The process takes up to 9 months and creates a burden on gym or other fitness users desiring to offer showers for the clients. That is a good question. I do not know the answer. And I think, again, be more than happy to look it up and try to get you an answer if you remind us by email, because offhand, I don't know what the city is doing that or whether it's even considering something to try to find out. Do you have any comment on that, Cal? I guess the same thing, right?
No, Fernando, yeah. I mean, it's a very specific question. I really don't know without looking into it.
Okay, no problem. Well, we're on to the next slide, and it's other government agencies, and we're going back to the DOB. It's important to give that understanding of how the DOB works with respect to zoning. It's responsible for interpreting and enforcing New York's zoning resolution. And what do they do? Again, they issue building permits after reviewing building plans to determine compliance with the zoning resolution, the building code. The building code is another subject which the most we're going to touch upon is right now in this slide, which is incredibly complex, which again, why you need architects and contractors and expediters to help maneuver through that. They review the applications and grant certificates of occupancy, allowing legal occupancy of new or altered structures, C of Os. That's another big thing. If you know, C of Os, I believe they came into being in the 1930s. Before that, I don't think there were C of Os. It's something that happened, I think, in the 1930s at some point. The DOB interprets provisions of the zoning resolution subject to appeal to the Board of Standards and Appeals, which is what we were talking about before when they look into special permits, rezoning, and changes. And it issues, the DOB, procedural guidelines for administering all these regulations. It orders the correction, the DOB is in charge of that, of any zoning violations as is appropriate, and prosecutes violations. Not fun if you're trying to do development and the DOB comes after you for that. And it maintains the public records, a lot of people asking about information, of building permits, C of Os, certificates of occupancy, inspections, violations, and other property profile information. Now, much of development, now when I say as of right, I'm really talking about the zoning margers and the air rights are as of right. But as I said before, this isn't the only agency we've been talking about, the BSA and the DOB and the Department of City Planning Commission. The borough presidents are involved, depending on the situation, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, the City Council, and the mayor may be involved. And ultimately, if there's a dispute and it's not going anywhere, or there's someone feels they've been wrong, there'll be the courts, the New York State's Supreme Court system, which, by the way, by way of understanding, New York has multi-layered courts. The highest court in New York State is the Court of Appeals, which is really our Supreme Court. And beneath that is Appellate Division, and beneath that is what's called the Supreme Court, but it's not really Supreme Court, it's a county level court. There are also courts for the city of New York called the Civil Court. Anyway, I don't want to get too complicated here. And they're outside of New York City. There are town courts, village courts, county courts, and the like. There are a lot of people involved with all these things. Any other questions? I don't see that. I hope people are listening. I know you are. I have to tell myself that, like being on radio. I am repeating myself. Okay, next one. Zoning related types of approval. This is what Cal and I have been talking about a little. As of right, that's CPC, Department of Building Certifications and Authorizations. Generally, depending on what it is, it's as of right. Discretionary, and that's the important thing that we're talking about here in the context of this continuing education class, has to do, and zoning has to do with variances, again, Board of Standards of Appeals, special permits, again, the Board of Standards of Appeals, and ULURP, which is an unwieldy name, but it refers to the land review procedure that is implemented by the BSA in order to determine whether the zoning, the development itself is can be approved given height, bulk, use, zoning district, zoning lot, and the like. Again, very complicated, very interesting, and can be somewhat dry when we're trying to figure out numbers and so forth. Any other questions? I don't see anything else. Do you, Cal?
No. Just somebody sent us an email and I responded to it.
All right.
I like this group attendees, very active, and they send emails right away, so I'm trying to stay on top of it.
Okay. Okay, I understand. I'm sorry. For a moment, I had a problem with, but I'm okay now with my computer or laptop. I'm on a laptop now, but speaking to you from beautiful Queens County. Until phase 2 lets us go back to Midtown Manhattan where our office is. Okay, zoning, the districts. We mentioned that before. Residential is the most common. 75% of the city's zoned land area is residential and has 10 types of districts. The ones I mentioned before, R1, low density, through R10, highest density. And the second letter or number in some district means additional controls. And that's what I was talking about, R10AB or R234. There are so many different things that go into that would modify or describe alternative ways of way these residential districts are described, because they may have different things going on. The important thing in a lot of these residential districts, as well as commercial, and to an extent also with manufacturing, is the concept of the floor area ratio, which we mentioned before, FAR, which measures the building's total floor area. And it's a formula of total floor area, building floor area divided by the gross lot area. That determines how high in each district, residential district or in commercial, the building can be. And if any variances, again, can be, some are by appeal with the BSA, some are by zoning lot mergers, as we described before. In fact, Cal and I were working on a zoning lot merger at the end of last year, and it had to do with air rights with the house in the Bronx. So we're going to sell to the lot owners next door who wanted to construct what wouldn't have been permissible. Instead of they wanted to, instead of a 4-story building, they wanted, I think it was 7 or 8, and it was those of you who heard us speak before, it's kind of a kooky deal because the owner next door, an older woman who was living in the house for I don't know how many decades, was making special demands with respect to the zoning lot development agreement. The agreement that the ZELDA, or zoning lot development agreement, is what's filed with the Department of, the Buildings Department, DOB, in order to sanction the merger, in order to permit the higher building through transfer of air rights or development rights. Anyway, this nice older woman, I never met her, through her lawyer, made several demands which our clients agreed to. It was kind of weird, and that 1 year supply of cat food had to be given because she had a lot of cats. Our clients agreed to that. They wanted she wanted snow removal and cleaning the sidewalks, demanding that to be done by the developers, and they agreed to that as well. And once the building would be constructed, the security would be put in place in terms of lighting and so forth, and wanted to make sure that those cameras and lights that would be put there would also cover her house next door, so she'd have that additional security. And our clients agreed to that. So this is a lot of times what happens with these things in that deal, which because of the pandemic, everything literally froze and we were stalled. That go into these kind of zoning lot mergers that affect something that's residential. The building to be constructed was going to be or should be an apartment building, not for commercial use. But the problem was also the zoning lot merger that the 2 lots are contiguous, but it involved, in effect, would be a merging and would be a split lot because they had slightly different controls with respect to each other, even though they're contiguous. Very complicated situation and deal. And the clients, both of them happen to be, one's an architect, the other one, I forgot, more of a developer, and they're good. They have their expediter, they go to the Department of Buildings and the like. And floor area ratios, how it's determined how high that building could be and how asking for something to be even higher than that through, not a variance in this case, but through a merger with the next door neighbor, property owner who's transferring those air rights. Are there any questions? I thought I did. Okay, here's one. With 2 separately owned lots combined into one project, are the city taxes subject to change as a result of the convergence or the merger? Let me make 2 things clear here. One, and I should have said this before, zoning lots are not tax lots. They're different. They maybe cover the same area, but they're 2 different things. One is just has to do with taxes, the other one has to do with zoning. If they're combined, the city taxes may or may not be changed. And yet there are incentives that the city taxes could be reduced if someone in the merger asks for what are called through bonuses, and I'll talk about that just shortly, that provide something that the city wants in terms of development. So it's, again, and I don't want to sound as if ambiguous or repetitive. It's on a case-by-case basis. Depends on the lot and the district and what's being proposed. But it can change, yes. I don't know by how much. I don't know what can be done specifically. It depends on each different development. Okay. Residential districts. Now, there are many nuances. For example, with respect to residential districts, residents are permitted in commercial districts, in all commercial except for C7 and C8. There are certain higher density commercial districts, primarily Manhattan, that are substantially residential in character. And here we're talking about what's happening, well, on the east, Midtown East, which has a lot more residential once you get to 2nd Avenue and 1st Avenue. And it's in applicable commercial districts, the size of residential building or the residential portion of a mixed-use building is governed by the bulk provisions of a specific equivalent residential district. So again, it depends where we're talking about and which part of the district and in which borough and the like. And for example, the example we give here is R6 is the residential district equivalent of C4-2 and C4-3 districts. I know that sounds complicated, but basically what it's saying is everything depends on what's going on in that specific district. Now, Residential districts permit most community facilities, that's schools, houses of worship, medical facilities, hospitals, and that kind of thing. And in certain districts, the maximum permitted floor area ratio, again, the FAR, for community facilities exceeds the maximum permitted for residential uses in order to accommodate a medical center or schools. So that could answer some of your question, why, for example, a school is 10 stories when everything nearby is a lot lower, but that's one thing they allowed in order to accommodate that residential district. Or a hospital facility that's 7 stories and it's higher than everything else around there. Everything depends on the district and what's going on there and what the needs are, as determined by the City Planning Commission and politicians and the City Council, Borough President. Everyone tries to chime in or have something to do that. So a developer trying to do these kind of things has to answer to a lot of people. It's important to add here before we move to the next slide about bonuses. There can be additional square feet for a building if in certain zones, for example, in a mixed-use building, the developer adds a grocery store because they want more availability for the people in that neighborhood to buy groceries and the like. And if that's added there as part of the plan, it's actually constructed, they will permit, or before it's constructed, the authorities will permit, the powers that be, that instead of being whatever, just for the sake of our 50,000 square feet, it could be 70,000 square feet. In certain zones, that's permitted. There's the affordable housing bonus. Again, a developer could have an increase in square feet if it's included affordable housing in a residential or mixed use building. Again, depends in certain zones whether that is encouraged and permitted. And then there's a public plaza bonus, and it also increases the floor access ratio, FAR, floor to area ratio, I'm sorry. And that follows the Department of Commission Planning guidelines, depending again on the area where the building will be constructed, whether they want to encourage this kind of use and allow that kind of building, generally commercial building, and depending on how high it'll be, they'll say set it back and we want some kind of public plaza, people can congregate there during lunch and read a book or have something to eat. A lot of variables come into play. What are these more questions here? This is a comment from one of the attendees. I am often concerned about Upper East Side mid-block zoning of low building height. Is there a chance that this could be changed so that higher buildings could be erected mid-block? I know there was a variance for a building on 85th and 2nd, must have been joining an avenue lot with a mid-block lot. This kind of development scares me in the future. So I'm not sure about the comment. Are you saying the person who put this comment in here, or question, you're concerned about mid-block things, or you are on the corner? I'm not sure. But again, there are a lot of factors that come into that will affect whether this development will be permitted in the future. I'm sorry I can't answer your question. I need a little more guidance or clarity there. How do you determine the height of buildings allowed to go up based on FAR? I apologize, but it's complicated. Yes, it's very complicated, and I know it is. And if I'm not being clear, I apologize. Again, it depends on the floor area that wants to be built and whether the zoning lot, how big it is. And the example I give, the simplest one, a 20,000 foot floor square area on a 10,000 lot will be a FAR 2 to 0. So again, it's very site specific to the lot, the size. And again, I believe I said this before, FAR varies. It could be where it's facing a wider street or a boulevard as opposed to a narrow street, what the use would be, commercial, residential. So this building you're talking about, if it's residential, commercial, or even manufacturing, may have a different thing involved. Again, if there are bonuses involved, if it's mixed use and affordable housing is encouraged or part of the mix, or a grocery store to have more neighborhood facilities, or a public plaza, then that will affect also the FAR. It's very complicated, but it's fascinating because it just goes to show that nothing is ever in a great metropolis or city like New York, which I happen to really love. Well, but that's my opinion, and as complicated and crazy as it is, it has so many things going on at the same time, so many moving parts that it's hard to give clear answers, if only because every situation is very different. And I apologize for that, but that's the best I can tell you. If you give me a specific example, then I can look into it and try to provide you more information. Is that was question and answer. It was a good question. Chat I see two things here. Oh, it's the same question there. Queens, sounds like the Queens Mason a little cut. I'm not sure what that means. House, oh, the one about the Bronx thing we're talking about? Yes, except that person, if I recall, and I remember because I live in Queens, I've been here forever, this person, the attendee is referring to, if you know the geography of Queens, I think it's near Elmhurst, near the LIE, and where the Queens Center Mall is along Queens Boulevard. There's this little house that stood there, and they wanted to tear it down to build a bigger shopping center. And I think there was a bank next door, which a nice curved arch roof, very unusual for the times in the 60s. And this lady refused to sell. It was an old lady. She refused to sell. But that's a little different because the Bronx one has to do with the transfer of development rights or air rights. And this woman agreed subject to these conditions. This person never wanted to sell the property to permit a bigger development. And I don't remember the details in the 60s. I don't remember the amounts, but she would not budge, not at all. And the house stood there until I think she passed away. It was no longer there, and they tore it down, but it was long after the development had been completed. But it's somewhat analogous. Any other questions? I see, okay, no. All right, next thing is the contextual, districts. This is what we had mentioned before. It applies to moderate and higher density residential districts that are broadly characterized as contextual or non-contextual. What does that mean? A non-contextual district is a diverse mix of buildings without predominant context. It could be a real mishmash of some restaurants, cafes, some schools and churches, together with some apartment building and some single home families or 2 or 3 family homes, or if you're in Brooklyn or Manhattan, brownstones combined with other things. Quality housing program, I mentioned that before, that's to promote an alternative to height factor buildings and tower buildings, and includes trying to build a building more appropriate to the neighborhood itself, in terms of scale and not to be overwhelmed. And then there are contextual districts, which have additional requirements to promote certain uniformity as opposed to a diverse mix. And most zoning districts that end in a letter are contextual, but not all of them. And they're also important for maintaining scale and form, like the great brownstones that one sees I forgot the street over there in Harlem that has it's a beautiful part. I've been there and I don't remember now. Or the brownstones that are on Central Park West or in Brooklyn, where they have a cobble, I think is it Cobble Hill? I don't remember now. I'm forgetting all my names, or Brooklyn Heights. In any case, yes, they try to make, that's more of a contextual district because they're maintaining that scale and form and not allowing, much like we mentioning in a different context, although it's not a zoning issue so much, in Washington, D.C., that nothing can be higher than the monument, or in Paris, nothing can be higher than the Eiffel Tower. Any more questions? You see anything, Cal?
I'm sorry, Fernando. I'm trying to mute because I'm typing to somebody who asked the question.
Okay.
No, but we're good to go.
Okay. Anyway, so yes, this goes back to the question about the Upper East Side development, and it could be erected, higher buildings could be erected mid-block as opposed to the corner. Comments? Yes. It's a problem there. I'd love to talk about that offline. That's a more difficult thing to address here in the class.
And if I may ask, just if you can just put the questions in the Q&A, because it's really getting confusing between the chat and the Q&A. We're going back and forth. In the Q&A, we can actually mark the question as answered, and we can have a better flow. Just request if you could, please.
Well, in the chat, they reminded me, it is Strivers Row. Thank you very much. I could not recall the name offhand. With respect to the brownstones and the uniformity of scale and form, very important. Okay, that's about it, I think, for the chat and the questions.
I think there's a question in the chat asking where can we find zoning info in Nassau County, and each town has their own zoning map, and you need to visit the town itself to get the zoning information specific for that town.
Yes, that's true, because New York City is itself, it's the Department of Buildings. That's the central one. But once you get out of the 5 boroughs, it depends on the town and county.
Right. So you basically for Nassau and Suffolk, you visit the town itself, and they have a building department there, and they have the zoning maps and the information.
Thank you, Cal. All right, next is zoning commercial districts. So we talked about residential a little more in detail, and now it's commercial, which mentioned before. There are 8 types of commercial districts. These are based on so-called functional similarities and location requirements, and they go from small retail and service shops, which would be C1, C2, to larger stores with more goods and services, which are borough-wide, like Main Street in Flushing or Fordham Road in the Bronx, which is in that C4, to central business districts serving the city, region, and nation, and that's more Midtown Manhattan, C5, C6, or downtown Brooklyn, much larger areas. These are the different kind of commercial districts, each one from C1 and so forth, that determine what goes on there and what can be built as a result if someone wants to do some new project or demolish a building, assuming it's not a landmark preservation commission building that's been designated a landmark, and what they can do if it's not that, to proceed with the new development subject to all these approvals. Now, these 3 districts serve specific purposes. There are 3 districts, I apologize, that serve specific purposes. C3 is for waterfront, such as it is. New York City used to be a city that had tons of shipping, both passenger as well as commercial, and that's almost all gone. It's gone to New Jersey for the most part, but it's something that's out there, like the Brooklyn Navy Yard, parts of Red Hook, South Street Seaport. C7 is for amusement parks. That would be Coney Island, maybe a couple other places. There used to be one called, I believe, Adventureland in Queens and Flushing. It no longer exists, but that's another designation. And C8 for heavy repair and automotive. There are certain areas where you see that in the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, and it's another designation for commercial district and what's permitted there, and that's what's favored and what's encouraged and how it's limited just to those purposes and how it's controlled. It's all about trying to somehow control growth in an intelligent way as much as possible, subject to political pressure and businesses coming in and developers and all these other people with different agendas, not always that are coinciding, and they have to work it out, or we try to work it out. And again, if it does, the agencies come to whatever conclusion they do, and someone's dissatisfied, then they go to the courts. Is there another question here? Yeah, Convent Avenue. Okay, that's true. That had to do with maintaining scale and form. I was talking about the brownstones. Since there's another question here, since the use of tables haven't been updated since the 60s, how do you extrapolate a permitted use for a new type business? Very good question from the attendee. And I would say the way to do that is get a really good architect and expedite it to go down to the DOB to make sure that everything is done the way it should be done. It's a very complicated process, and that's why that proverbial team has to be assembled with people you trust and with whom you can work together. So that the answer to that question is get someone good who's going to deal with the DOB to get that done. And if it then becomes an issue that needs a lawyer involved, then you retain the lawyer who has experience in land use and zoning issues, and commercial and residential real estate. All right, no other questions? Next one, manufacturing special purpose districts. Again, I've been talking about this. It's manufacturing includes industrial and manufacturing, such as warehouse and distribution centers, catering suppliers, that's part of the manufacturing district, ferry and ship terminals, not as much as we used to have, but they're still around. Film production studios, the famous Silver Cup studio there in Long Island City, right next to the 59th Street Bridge. And for example, essential municipal facilities, I believe I mentioned sewage, sanitation, and train yards. Yes, there are train yards in New York, all over the place, not only just for subways, but for Metro North as well. And these are part of manufacturing districts. And if anyone wants to make any change there, and the city sees through its agencies and political leaders that it's worth doing it, or it doesn't affect the existing infrastructure, such as it is, maybe they'll consider a variance to put some kind of structure. But it's not that easy because New York used to have a lot of manufacturing and industry, and we've become more of a service center here with tourism and real estate and finance, and that's all in trouble now because of the pandemic, but that's really the strength of New York City now. So Manufacturing really deteriorated and diminished, but it still exists. Now, there's some residential developments are allowed in certain districts, and that's principally Long Island City, because Long Island City has that huge train yard nearby, which Metro North uses, and has the Midtown Tunnel, and it's bordered the other side by the 59th Street Bridge. So they allowed, and there are a lot of warehouses there. Now, a lot of stuff has been changing over time, but that's some of the variances that we've been talking about that have been permitted in the last 10, 20, 25 years. And special purpose districts, again, districts. I don't know how many there are, but the big ones are 125th Street. I forgot about Battery Park City. That's another one. College Point is another one in northern Queens, close to, on the opposite side of Flushing Bay from the LaGuardia Airport, and just north of Flushing itself. These are districts created for reasons that have to do with economic development. And Battery Park City was created to have a residential area near Wall Street to encourage development in the long run, and it has. And it, again, these are political issues, people who come together through their representatives and business groups and real estate developers saying this is something we should use and we should try to establish. And it takes time, but they end up doing it. And it's a special thing. It's not residential, necessarily commercial, manufacturing. It's for the special purpose of developing that area. Any comments, Cal? Any other questions?
No, that I can see, no.
All right, good. Moving right along. Next one, recent trends. And I think this is the end. So our last slide, if I'm keeping track here. In New York zoning in 2016, mandatory inclusionary housing was introduced. And this is part of a thing in zoning that was done mainly to encourage housing production, affordability, and the quality. And the city council really approved these changes to increase this affordable housing, and they based it on different criteria. These criteria, together with the mandatory inclusionary housing guidelines, have been used a lot in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan, and it's arising from individual spot rezoning initiatives, city agency land transfers, and public-private partnerships. It's another part of zoning. It's included in zoning, and it's one of the trends that they try to develop, because before this pandemic and lockdown, one of the biggest things had to do with affordability in housing in New York, which tangentially related to that. And when this is, I know the class is not about this. They made changes last July, 2019, at the beginning of July, with respect to rent stabilization and rent control, and then paying commissions to brokers, I'm sorry to say, with respect to rentals, market rate rentals. All these things came down from the legislature in Albany because there was a lot of pressure building up with respect to housing, which has been incredibly expensive in this city of ours. And one of the things that dealt with that along the zoning, with respect to zoning rules and regulation, was to have this MIH, which came into existence in 2016. So any developer going forward, as opposed to making all these other passing laws about rent control and rent stabilized apartments and brokers fees, to say, let's say when we're going to have a development, we want to include as much as possible that kind of affordable housing, which will help people stay in New York who aren't earning as much as the market rates were up until recently, increasingly demanding. So that's one of the trends in New York zoning, aside from all the other constant developments going back and forth in court battles and whatnot. That being said, given what's going on now in New York, and the way the real estate market is in turmoil on every level, whether it's luxury condos or construction, which is now starting again, it has started, it was permitted under phase 1, whether it's doing the putting together whatever, trying to help the restaurants and hospitality protect owners or tenants who have personal liability, and trying to protect them from that personal liability by saying their good guy guarantees aren't going to be enforceable. Whether it's a New York governor's order that the security deposit on a residential tenant can be applied and has to be applied to the rent. All these things have created, are in response and to the turmoil, have created a lot of uncertainty. So it's hard to say what will be going forward, except that there will always be change here in New York, and it's the degree to which it will be changed we're not sure. And I can just say that this, for me and for Cal, it's a fascinating area of the law, and it's very complicated. Again, it needs a lot of people involved to get it done and to be done right. And are there any questions? Please feel free later to email Cal and me. We will try to respond to them. Please make the requests for PowerPoint. More than happy to send you by email. And I think that's about it. Any other questions before we turn this over to Brenda? A half an hour early. Sorry, Brenda. I can't hear anybody. Is there any other questions?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. I think you've gotten through. Wait, let's see. Nobody came in.
All right. Well, please feel free that after this class and going forward to contact us, and we'll be more than happy to answer those questions to the best of our ability.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you guys for a great class. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Okay, talk to you guys soon. Everybody stay healthy.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for the opportunity, Brenda. Take care. Nice seeing you.
You too. Bye-bye.